False news, unverified claims, alternative facts. What's the future for honest journalism? When I see John Sopel sort of mixing it with Trump, it sort of has a memory for me of you sort of mixing it with Alex Salmond.
No memory at all.
No memory at all.
It's all gone. I ended up in a pretty lively row at a news conference. Conclusion was that Salmond, targeted me. I produced a script line in a news bulletin, which I have since said was a stupid form of words and should have been written a better way. But that made me a target of Twitter, on Twitter for Scottish Nationalists, and also triggered then 4,500 people marching on the BBC Scottish headquarters behind a banner marked "Sack Nick the Liar Robinson." I later was not terribly well, but the one, I think you know this one, the tweet that amused me but outraged my wife, but it did entertain me, was a tweet that came from a Scottish Nationalist that said, "Glad to hear you've no longer got cancer, but I hope you get run over by a bin lorry."
Did you have a problem with anything about the 350 million claim?
It was a political debating point. If you take the gross contribution of the UK to the EU and you divide it by 52, you come out with a figure which looks pretty much like 350 million. And basically that was the message. Every election I've ever been involved in, one side has made a claim and the other has said that's rubbish. Now that is traditional political debate. It doesn't seem to me that that falls within the definition of fake news, which is an entirely different and more recent development.
Where do you stand on Trump?
His sort of dismissal of the media is fascinating in that, he's doing things which nobody previously would have dared to do. And I think the media are to some extent to blame because they were so dismissive of him throughout the election.
Clearly Facebook feels it's under some kind of pressure, particularly in Germany, particularly in the US, because Mark Zuckerberg announced various steps last week. Do you want to sort of summarize them? And the one I'm particularly interested in is the idea that you, Facebook, would put on a web page the words "disputed by third parties."
The mission of Facebook is to allow people to share, make the world more open and connected through sharing. And we just thought that historically by doing that, we were making the world a better place. And what we've come to realize is that isn't necessarily the case. The ability for anyone anywhere to post and it to be globally available could also lead to difficulties, could lead to sharing of information that isn't properly sourced or true. With regard to fake news, we really set out to address a number of, we think, the most egregious types of misinformation or hoaxes. Financially motivated spam, which is really the worst of the worst. The Pope has endorsed Donald Trump, or Hillary Clinton is a lizard. And these would be shared, very, very quickly across the web.
And you sort of picked up on this, I think, in your article in The Guardian the end of last week. You said that Zuckerberg had written, I think, 6,000 words, but he hadn't answered the big question.
I think the problem is that you are editors, but you just don't want to admit it. People don't get upset about the fake news, the fake figure. Clearly, you would want to have some distinct way of saying this is something where the figures can be interpreted one way and the other way. This lot have been fact-checked. Economist fact-checkers have done their job.
You're talking about the algorithm in the context of the news feed?
So if there was no algorithm, so let's say you've been away for 3 days, the average person would get about 2,000 posts in their newsfeed per day. If you actually followed the BBC, which uses instant articles and uploads, you maybe have 10,000 or even more stories within your newsfeed on a given day. For whoever you follow, this is going to come into your feed. But based on the people that you are closest to, the people that you most like, that you most comment on, their stories will appear above those people that you tend to like their stuff less, or ignore what they post, or you click on something and you quickly abandon it because perhaps it wasn't interesting to you. So we're going off of signals that help determine a meaningful flow of information for you.
Just broadening it out, Stuart, but bring me back if you like. My argument for impartiality is a legal requirement for television news. I would argue for it and argue that we should all argue for it again, because if we look at what happens where it doesn't exist, right-wingers watch Fox News and liberals, as they're described in the US, watch MSNBC, and that when you have a debate about, say, healthcare reform, there are no shared facts. And for all the weaknesses, and there clearly are weaknesses in the model of impartial news, Sky, ITV, let's always say them, not just the BBC, do attempt to come up with some shared facts on which the country can have a debate.
On impartiality, I want to see both. I don't see anything wrong with partiality. The Daily Mail presents a particular point of view. You buy it knowing what that point of view is going to be. What I do want is to have somewhere where people can go, where they can be pretty confident that it will not have a political perspective, it will be impartial.
But where does Channel 4 News fit into that?
Well, Channel 4 News, is adjudicated by Ofcom, and Ofcom rules that it is impartial. Now, occasionally I might find that judgment a little hard to swallow.
Dealing with a woman I interviewed at UEA's at Harvard University in East Anglia, who said to me, I don't know where to find the facts. And I said, well, where do you normally get information? She said, Facebook.
If this disruption, and I don't just mean the economic one, I mean the news disruption is as big as I think we've reflected tonight, and perhaps the interest in the event shows, then I think that ultimately, if you will the public good, then you might have to think about yourselves as investors in news as truth. And that might take you a bit out of the comfort zone I think you're in now about what kind of projects you limit yourself to.
And I think that was the challenge, the best challenge we've had tonight from Anne to the companies is it isn't enough to simply say, we'll get rid of the Holocaust stuff, denial if we can, we'll get rid of weirdos in Macedonia or hotel bedrooms. You have to say that when people have a massive decision to make, like whether we should stay in or out of the EU, whether we should change the American healthcare system, there is somewhere they can find on these sites that are so important to them where they can get facts.
That's a good way to end. Well, you thank our panel. You've already thanked Anne. Now thank Patrick, Nick and John.
Thank you.